Welcome to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Former Congressman Peter Roskam leads Baker Hostetler's federal policy team. Through interviews with leading members of Congress, Peter provides an insightful first-hand view into the latest policy and political debates on Capitol Hill. In today's episode, Peter is joined at the 36th Annual Legislative Seminar in Washington, D.C. by his Baker Hostetler colleague, former Congressman Heath Shuler, and Congressman Kevin Hern, a Republican from Oklahoma. Hern is a member of the House Republican leadership as the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee and is a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Before his election to Congress in 2018, Hern owned 24 McDonald's restaurants in Oklahoma. Peter, Heath, and Congressman Hern discussed Republicans' efforts to renew the expiring Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Let's listen in to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam.
Thanks for coming. You doing all right?
I'm doing great. It's a fantastic place in Congress right now.
Well, thank you for your time. It's so interesting watching different guests come in and how they walk and kind of what the canter is. And you're walking like a man who has done his work. Let me just put it that way.
Well, and we shouldn't make it this hard, really. I know that's both of you all have been on the Hill, and sometimes you scratch your head going, why do we make it this difficult? Yeah. Anyway.
So you've got a particular background that I just want to share with the group and then kick off a conversation about taxes, because you're on the Ways and Means Committee. As I was describing somebody to somebody before you came, just sipping coffee outside, and I said, Kevin Hern is one of the people on the committee who is influencing others on the committee. And I've seen this. I've seen people defer to you. You've been the leader of the Republican Study Committee. You're now chairman of the Republican Policy Committee. So you're somebody that people are looking to and kind of like, well, what do you think about this? And I think it's based on your, incredible experience, multiple McDonald's franchises, business owner, et cetera. How have you approached this? There's a dynamic, Kevin, that says, well, 2017 was, let's just do the same thing over again. And that's not the dynamic. 2017 was really different. It was aspirational. It wasn't driven by deadlines. It wasn't sort of defending the status quo and so forth. How do you approach this at the committee level, creating this bill that's being amended probably as we speak and all kinds of other touches? But how do you approach that based on somebody who's been wildly successful in business? What's that like?
Well, first, thanks both of you for having me here, and thanks everybody for being here. I want to give you a big shout out. When I was running for office and had just actually before I got elected, I would sit and talk to you for a long time in Capitol Hill Club about Congress, because everybody thinks they know what Congress is like until you get there, right? Certainly not football.
That's right.
So I say that. And then the second thing is, I learned a long time ago that standing and yelling and screaming doesn't get you anywhere very fast, except in trouble. I think I was like 5 or 6. You guys can take that however you want to read. We need to be adults in a room, and we can agree to disagree, but we need to respect other people. Some of my good friends are, chairman of the ranking member of the Democrat Party on Ways and Means. I respect everybody's decision, and I'll tell you one of the reasons for that. I don't know what everybody's background is in here, but I learned a long time ago in my 35 years as a franchisee in McDonald's, and I worked to be in leadership representing the 3,500 franchisees, and I've said many times there's nothing more grassroots than McDonald's. There's not a single member of Congress that doesn't have a McDonald's franchisee in their district. They have the ability to go talk and ask questions and tell them their plight in life and the things they're concerned about. They don't do it very often. But we have a representative body, 30 members that were elected by our peers, 3,500, to represent the interests and points of view to the company. If you think about that relationship, it's much like being in Congress, except we didn't get paid for it. I traveled a lot. It was a way to pay it forward. But what you learn to do is respect other people's opinions. You also wanted to understand where everybody else was coming from, because unless you understand what everybody else wants, it's very difficult to negotiate to a moving target. And quite frankly, that's the problem we have right now in the House. We passed the unthinkable back, seems like 10 years ago now, it was just a few months ago, the budget language. And if you asked Senator Kane this question, he would tell you that nobody thought on the Senate side, nobody in the press thought we'd do it. They gave us zero chance of passing with a slim majority of only losing 2 votes, that we could lose 2 votes and still pass. But a language that said if you cut a minimum of $1.5 trillion, that you could have tax cuts of $4 trillion, and that the $2.5 trillion would be made up by economic growth. Or at $2 trillion, you could cut $4.5 trillion in taxes. That was sort of the scale that was negotiated by the so-called hardcore fiscal conservatives, which I am one of those. But nobody ever thought anybody would hit that. Not only did we hit that, we exceeded that. And we didn't cut Medicare benefits. And the score on the tax cuts was lower than the $4 trillion. So we exceeded on both sides. And yet, that was not good enough. That target, so this is a group of folks, and it wasn't just Freedom Caucus, a group of folks that get this for us and we're good. That wasn't good enough. Then on the other side, if you're talking about SALT, you think you have a caucus for a single purpose of, here's what we want, we're going to negotiate to that. Oh, no. No. We talked about SALT for months, and nobody had a position in the 4-5 until literally yesterday. So it's very difficult when you're trying to negotiate in good faith as a leader of a group of 434 other CEOs of their 800,000 to get to a place. And that is what's so different in Congress than it is in business. And the sooner you learn that as a business person, the sooner your hair stops turning gray or falling out. But so I'm giving you sort of a Senator Kane response to one of your questions, but that is an important notion to get and understand, because then you have to figure out how you're going to influence that and talk to people that are influencers within those particular areas to get to a place. And I said a long time ago, when I got here, I don't really care about, I actually hate politics, but I really think policy is important because that's what's going to be left behind when you leave this place. And, I'm going to work for lower tax policies, and we're doing that. I fully support President Trump, what he's trying to do. Is it always good policy? No, but it's a great jolt to help the working class people, and no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. That's, if you look at the bill, that's only for 4 years. It's not for 10 years or permanent. It's just for 4 years to give them a help to get out of the 23% inflation they've had the last 4 years. But everybody else's rates stay the same. And it is a fallacy to tell, for the press to say that he's cutting taxes for the rich. That is simply not true. The only taxes that are being cut additionally are small business people, and the working class. That's it. That is it. And to make that happen, you have to make permanent the great work that Peter and others worked on back in the day on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which then was $1.5 trillion deficit economic growth. And the latest CBO score from Swagel was about 1.9 trillion is what it generated. So that sort of frames all the work we've been doing. And the speaker's been working his tail off. The president came yesterday and talked for almost 2 hours. And he has no problem appointing people out in the room that are, as he calls them, grandstanders. And it was a pretty intense meeting, mixed in with a lot of laughter.
So I got to compliment you on, all the work that you do, right? I mean, it is really hard. It's really challenging, and be able to do it and try to keep the politics out of it, right? So what do? We fast forward now, implement the House becomes law, the House bill becomes law. What do we ultimately do with when you look at our, debt deficit? If you look at that side of the ledger, I mean, with DOGE has kind of been that 15% of the budget side of it. Obviously there's got to be, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on our debt, and defense. That's 85% of our budget. How do we ultimately get to something that, like the Bowles-Simpson report, that I strongly supported, and if I wouldn't have had a member walk out, we would have actually passed that as a bipartisan budget way back in 2009. We would have been able to pass that as a actual standalone. That would have been the congressional budget that went to the House floor. Both the Democrat and the Republican bill failed. and we're hoping to have gotten that across the line. Is there any appetite to ultimately try to find a fix for that for long term? Because we don't want our interest debt to become greater than than any other item on the ledger.
Yeah, it's a great question. I never ran for anything that I ran for Congress, but I always tried to support people. And the person that got me interested in politics in 1999 when I moved from Arkansas to Oklahoma to purchase a couple McDonald's was Tom Coburn. Coming out of the house then. I like I said, I didn't know much about politics. I was just a guy who tried to create jobs, put Americans to work, and wished the government was out of my way. When he ran for Senate 4 years later, I'm also a pilot, and I flew him all over the state when he was running for Senate, and learned a lot about his conservatism and how this place was broken.
He had the book.
He had the book. He had many books.
He had the book.
They all centered around one thing: that at some point in time, that this place is not going to be able to pay its debts. Yep. And the first meeting that we went to was in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, the home of Phillips 66, and he spoke to about a room this size, and pretty much everybody in the room are retired Phillips 66 people. And he said, most of you remember me from 4 years ago when I was in the House, but I'm telling you as a senator, we cannot continue down this pathway because we're going to be broke. And the sooner we fix it, the easier it's going to be. So when I go to Washington, D.C., should I win? This was his first time I'd ever been with a candidate, his first meeting after he came from here to go back to start running. And he said, I'm going to work on the structure of Social Security and Medicare. And if you don't want me to do that, don't elect me. How many candidates have you heard say that their first campaign stop? And I looked at some of the guys working on campaigns. I said, well, this was a quick, fast campaign. And everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation because people knew that he was telling the truth.
Yes.
And that he would work. And these guys know that that's what he did. And he was very bipartisan. And I will tell you, there's probably, I come from that area, and many people, Tom Cole and some others, said they would run for Senate or governor, but they could never win my district because it's so conservative. And as Tom says, I'm very conservative, but I'm just not mad about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. In conservatism, it means you want limited government. You want each individual person to have the luxury of having a job so they have individual freedoms and liberties, and they experience that, and they owe nobody nothing. And for a guy like me that came out of the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas with no running water and no indoor plumbing until I was in the 8th grade, there is nothing more precious to me than preserving that opportunity for my 4 grandkids and my kids and grandkids after that. But we're not going to do it, as Heath just said, if we continue doing this out-of-control spending. Peter mentioned that I was chair of the Republican Study Committee. Well, the 2 years before that, I was the budget chair for the Republican Study Committee under Jim Banks. And for those 2 years, I signed the only balanced budgets in all of Congress. And then the last 2 years, as the Republican Study Committee chair, I signed 2 budgets. So I'm the only person in Congress that signed 4 budgets that balance. And you cannot balance the budget in America if you don't fix the waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It is not going to happen. You heard it here first. You're going to hear it here last because it is impossible. When, 20 years ago, I'm not sure, I can't remember when these guys came in, but 20 years ago, the discretionary spending in America was 60% or so. Today, it's like under 25%. And what that means is all of the fussing and fighting that you're hearing about is for 25% of $5 trillion, or $7 trillion, actually. The rest of it is on autopilot. And there's nowhere in the Constitution, the senator spoke about the Constitution a lot. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending. It says spending.
Yeah.
But people have no political intestinal fortitude to touch those because you won't get reelected. And I'm telling you, if we don't come together in a bipartisan way, much like, Bowles, Simpson, Bowles, and do the things, the hard work they did, and then have a president that will take those recommendations, people that understand the situation, have nothing to lose, because they care about this country, they have fought the good fight. We've got to have that courage, because quite frankly, there's nothing that says that we're incapable of being bankrupt, literally being bankrupt. And what that's going to look like is when the bond prices become so high that our interest and our debt is accelerating exponentially, that we have a place we have to devalue the dollar, have hyperinflation like we've seen in South America. I mean, that's it. The only thing that keeps us from happening right now is because of our fiat currency is predominantly the currency of the world. But I can tell you, that's changed a lot since Russia-Ukraine, because our sanctions has forced Russia, or allowed Russia, to go do business elsewhere in the world under the Chinese dollar. Iran selling oil directly to China, not denominated in U.S. currency as it always has been the standard, but in Chinese dollars. And every time you take that money out of the United States currency flow, you lessen the ability to sell our debt. And if we don't sell our debt, we got a real problem. As a matter of fact, let me just tell you a secret. The largest debt holders of American debt are you all as individuals, Americans. It's the greatest Ponzi scheme that's ever been invented. Madoff went to prison for 150 years. Our Ponzi scheme is out in the open and nobody even knows it. We go create bonds and borrow money for Americans to buy the bonds, and we just own our own debt. We just keep spending it. And Japan and China own 25% of our debt collectively together, and they're our largest outside of the United States debt holders. So we've got to get this under control.
We were roommates, housemates for 5 years, and I remember so many times, and I just thought he was just a brilliant individual, like you said, a very bipartisan way. And I think his knowledge, and you and I discussed this before, I mean, I just encourage you to kind of continue that, what Tom, was able to pass through. If you can get that and run with it, as American, we have to have that.
It's interesting to say that, because one of the things that Tom did that nobody ever criticized him over is during the financial crisis, he voted for TARP.
Yes, he did.
Because, and this is what I share with some of my friends on the Freedom Caucus. I said this with Bloomberg last week. Listen, I'm all about representing my district. But you represent your district until you've pushed as much as you can push, and then you have to represent America. And what Tom did, and did all the time, he would represent the district. But when it came to saving America and the financial system in America, he knew that was the right thing to do. Not the political thing, because, quite frankly, Senator Inhofe didn't vote against it, because the politically conservative thing to do would be not vote for it. But Tom voted for it. He never got 1 ounce of criticism, ever. Ever. And when he ran for re-election, nobody ever brought it up. Because they trusted him.
Let me ask you, last year, Jason Smith, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, was here, and he made some news, Kevin, when he said he was describing whipping the Smith-Wyden bill, and as he was interacting with a bunch of your colleagues in the House, not a bunch, some of your colleagues in the House, they were asking him why he wasn't raising the corporate rate. You've heard discussions of this. You've been in the middle. These discussions are happening in your presence. Raising the corporate rate, raising, the individual rate from 37, putting it back up to 39.6. Corporate SALT, one thing after another. The GOP and the underlying sort of tax orthodoxy used to be pretty predictable. It was read the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and you kind of know where most Republicans are. That is now shifting. What's going on? How does that feel right now? Am I overstating that, or is it a populist dynamic? And if so, what are the fault lines? Because it seems really interesting. It's different now.
Yeah, I think there's a reason when you read about why our government has lasted so long as a representative republic versus why all democracies fail. And if you look at populism, it really is a pretty close representation of a true democracy where everybody's opinion matters. Very difficult to operate in that environment for very long. Some would say Reagan was a populist to some extent, but he still believed that keeping taxes low was important. There's no question President Trump would self-identify as a populist. I mean, there's no way that, he could deny it. He wouldn't deny it. He knows that. Populism is occurring on both sides. On the Democrat side, it may be called progressivism. When I came into Congress in 2018, the only, renowned socialist Democrat in all of Congress was Bernie Sanders. He would, change that. And then when I came in 2018, there were 3 House members that were elected: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. They became the progressives in the House, and now they're There's well over 100 members that are part of that in just 6 years. And so people are moving away from wanting to work together. I think you heard the senator talk about that. There's a lot of things we can do bipartisan. It's just, as his words, it's just not sexy. Nobody wants to report on everything being the status quo. So there's a lot of money being raised on arguing with one another. And the more people argue, they continue to get polarized to the left or the right, which makes it so difficult to come together. All that's important because a very populist thing in America is to tax the crap out of the wealthy. Very populist. I mean, the wealthy don't pay their fair share. I mean, think about it, how many times you hear about that. Since 2017, the top 1% pay 42 of the United States taxes. 42%. What is fair share? I said this in the Ways and Means hearing last week. I said it to Richie Neal. I said it to John Larson and others. I said, you guys talk about fair share. Describe that to me. What is fair share? Give me a number. We went from 30% to 42. That wasn't enough. And the reason that's important is you heard this come out last week about, well, actually over the last 3 or 4 weeks, that we were going to let the tax rates expire on and be a new tax rate of $1 million and $2 million. So $1 million for an individual, $2 million for married, and go back to 39.6. And then we thought, well, that's good enough. Let's just go to 2.5 and 5. Well, that's good. Let's just keep going. I mean, let's just keep getting all you can get. Why not make it 60%? Why not go back to the 60s and 70s when it was 90%? The problem is once you start taking money from people, there's no definition. You want the top 1%, if you took all the money they made, you still couldn't balance the budget. That's where we've got to today. And so we have to kind of conservatism, limited government. You can't have limited government if you don't curtail how much money you take from you all as taxpayers, all of us as taxpayers. We have to rebalance. The senator talked about how much power we'd abdicated to the presidency. How much power have we taken from the states? Or the reciprocal of that is how much power have the states given the federal government because they didn't want to fight those battles on the lawns of their capital? I've said this to people in Oklahoma. Listen, the reason we have power in Congress, more power than ever, is because you guys don't fight the fight. And that is true. And so we have to kind of return federalism to where it should be. And the 10th, I'm a big 10th Amendment guy. I'm a big Article, 1 guy when it comes to this whole idea of, Article 1, Section 8, where it talks about, we've got to make sure that these enumerated powers are in the right place. But it's very difficult to turn this massive ship around, and that's why we're seeing, the highest revenues in American history, but also the highest spending. And so there's Jason, Chairman Smith, as he was speaking, we were getting calls back on the Capitol Hill. I mean, literally, it was like he was speaking to us real time. But I'll leave you with this, and then I know you got other questions, but I look at this, I'm an engineer by trade, by education, business guy, small business guy my entire life. I've only worked for one company in my entire life, and that was Rockwell International. I was an aerospace engineer right out of college. But the last 35 years, I'm the guy on both sides of the paycheck. Last to get paid. But here's what I can tell you. There's really 3 things that drive our economy. If you think about a car, and that's your individual rates, because you're going to spend your money in your communities unfettered by the federal government, or the state governments for that matter, but you're going to spend it in your communities because you are there. The second thing is the corporate rate. The corporate rate, when you combine that with the average state rate of about 4.25%, that keeps us at parity with China. The stated rate of China is 25%. We're about 25%. We start raising that against, we've never had an adversary, an economic adversary like China in our entire history as a country, ever. Third place is 18 trillion away, and that's Germany and Japan. The third thing is the small business section 199A. And it only works if the marginal rates stay the same, because all of those tax dollars flow to you as individuals. By the way, which is the truest way to get taxation immediately to the government and to the local the government, federally, state, whatever. C corps are not, because they can withhold dividends and all that and only get taxed on one side. You're going to get taxed on the corporate side, but it's the lowest rate. And so those 3 things and everything else we do, whether it's the House, the Senate, is how do we make that car go faster? Immediate expensing, R&D expensing, how do we re-incentivize manufacturing to stand up buildings here, come here, break down the barriers, international tax code, all that stuff is really around those three things. How do we make the core of our economy go faster?
Brilliant. Can't argue with that. Kevin Hern drops the mic. What can I say? Thank you for coming, my friend. It's great to catch up with you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Great job. Great to see you.
Thank you, Peter, Keith, and Congressman Hern. If you have any questions for Peter, his full contact information is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to Baker Hosts and The Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Comments heard on Baker Hosts are for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice regarding any specific facts or circumstances. Listeners should not act upon the information provided on Baker Hosts without first consulting with a lawyer directly. The opinions expressed on Baker Hosts are those of participants appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the firm. For more information about our practices and experience, please visit bakerlaw.com.